Welcome back to our Growing Disciples Daily Devotionals, where we're following Israel's decline as it's recorded in the books of 1 and 2 Kings. Their decline, which takes them from the reign of Solomon through to their captivity in Babylon, from monarchy to exile. It's really a narrative of spiritual decline, leading to their national decline. Previously in 1 Kings 11 and 12, we saw King Solomon's son Rehoboam succeed him as king in Jerusalem. But the nation of Israel was divided when the 10 northern tribes refused to acknowledge him as their king. Instead, they split away from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the south, creating their own kingdom with Jeroboam on the throne. So Rehoboam is the king in Jerusalem in the south, but Jeroboam is now king in Shechem in the north. And a little confusingly, the south is called Judah, the kingdom of Judah, and the north is called Israel, or sometimes Ephraim. So what kind of king did Jeroboam, king of the northern kingdom of Israel, turn out to be? Well, we pick up the narrative in 1 Kings 12:25, where the first thing Jeroboam did was prepared to fight Rehoboam. He fortified the cities of Shechem and Peniel, and he secured his power. The next thing Jeroboam did was to set up an alternative religion. Verse 26. Jeroboam thought to himself, "The kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their Lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam." Notice Jeroboam thinks to himself about this. He's not led by God. It's his own idea entirely to change the religion in order to fortify his own position of power. His actions have nothing to do with God or worship, or even the worship of Jeroboam's preferred alternative god. He manufactures a counterfeit religion to serve his own purposes. So verse 28, after seeking advice, we don't know who he sought the advice from, clearly not God or any priest or prophet with a concern for covenant faithfulness, but after seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." He set one up in Bethel and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin, and the people came to worship one at Bethel and went so far as Dan as to worship the other. Jeroboam built shrines on higher places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. He did this in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made. And at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places he had made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings. So Jeroboam uses God, in fact a counterfeit God of his own invention, to fortify his own position as king. His new religion clearly has some similarities and parallels to God and his ways, but Jeroboam's religion, it's much more convenient. There are outlets nearby in Dan and Bethel. Instead of God appointing priests, Jeroboam appoints new priests from anywhere and everywhere. Much more popular with the people than those crusty old Levites. And there are sacrifices and festivals, lots of festivals, just like those centered around the temple in Jerusalem. As much as we might be outraged at Jeroboam's self-serving religion, let's just pause for a moment and reflect on our own lives. Is our engagement with God and his people in our local church a relationship of convenience? Something that we do on our own terms? When and how it suits us? Do we worship God on our terms or on his terms? Is church more about us or about God? Now, to be honest, I find these questions personally very confronting. And please don't hear them coming from a position of condemnation. I simply offer them as a reflection arising from Jeroboam's actions. Perhaps you might prayerfully ponder these questions at the end of this devotional. In response to Jeroboam's outrageous actions, God does not remain silent or passive. In 1Kings 13, God sends a prophet to announce judgment against Jeroboam and his new cult. Signs are performed and Jeroboam's condemnation is assured. It's a job done. But the prophet is schmoozed and wined and dined by Jeroboam in an attempt to buy him off. And our sympathies go out to the prophet as he allows himself to be trapped. His demise follows. What we observe here is that God will not be mocked. Not by Jeroboam or by the compromising prophet. God is in control. He's the one who holds all the power, even as Jeroboam grasps for it, seeking to use it for himself. As Jeroboam lusts for power, the abuse of power comes along for the ride. So thinking back to Rehoboam, his problem seemed to be pride. He wanted to be a someone. He wanted to be recognized, to be honored, to be revered, even more than his great father Solomon. So as Rehoboam's problem was pride, Jeroboam's problem was power, a lust, a craving for power. And so how do we defend ourselves against the grasping for power and the misuse of power? As Christian people in the 21st century, we're not immune from this same sin. What can we do? First up, and most importantly, we recognize Jesus as Lord. He is Lord of all and He's Lord of us. When we become disciples of Jesus, we give up our power. Indeed, we give up ourselves. Now, listen again to how Jesus calls his disciples in Mark chapter 8. Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?" Jesus is Lord means that we are not. And by this our pride is exposed for what it is, and it's overthrown by His grace. How else might we defend ourselves against the misuse of power? We also follow Jesus' example of service. Let's listen in again as He teaches His disciples in Mark 10. When the 10 heard about this, that is, when the other 10 disciples heard that James and John had tried to secure positions of power for themselves in the coming kingdom of God, the other disciples became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be the first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." My encouragement for us today is to consider the places in which we have power. Perhaps in our business or our workplace, our classroom or our family. Perhaps we have positional power because of our role or a relational influence over others or some kind of popularity. Wherever we recognize that we have power, then we consciously and intentionally surrender that power to Jesus. That's not to say that we cease to use it, that we reject the trust and the responsibilities attached to that power. No, we use power for the benefit of others. We employ it for God's use, for His purposes. We are responsible managers of all that God has given us. And so in that situation, we surrender to him our rights and our privileges and whatever respect we think we deserve. Then we take up our cross and follow Jesus. And if we're tempted to use our power for anything other than serving others, we remember that even the exalted Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve.